So welcome to Making Hidden Disabilities Visible, Why Canada Needs a National Hidden Disability Symbol. My name is Michelle McDonald, and I am the Executive Director of Brain Injury Canada. I'm so thrilled to have the opportunity to bring together this esteemed panel to talk about the need for a more representative symbol in Canada. Firstly, I would like to acknowledge that every place in Canada, from east to west and north to south, has an Indigenous history. Although we are meeting virtually, we are all meeting on Indigenous, First Nations and Métis land, and as settlers, we are grateful for this opportunity. We thank all the generations of Indigenous people who have taken care of this land and still care for it today. We encourage everyone to recognize the contribution and importance of Indigenous peoples, acknowledge the harm caused to these communities, and be committed to improving relationships in the spirit of reconciliation and appreciation. So before I get to the speakers, I want to quickly address some housekeeping items. This event is being recorded. So if you feel fatigue or visual stress or want to watch after, a link of the recording will be sent to those who are registered, and it will also be posted on the Hidden Disability Symbol Canada website. We will also have a panel question and answer period towards the end of the webinar, so please submit your questions in the Q&A box at the bottom, and we will hold all questions until the end. Feel free to use the chat box throughout the webinar to make comments and engage with other people, but again, questions for the panelists go in the Q&A box. So before I announce our first panelist, I do want to thank Mary Para from the Brain Injury Society of Toronto and Richa Agarwal for their help and ongoing work in moving the Hidden Disability Symbol movement forward. Okay, so I want to introduce our first panelist. Laura Brydges is the founder of the Hidden Disability Symbol Canada movement and an advocate for the disability sector for many years. Welcome, Laura.
Hello there, I'm just starting my video. There we go. Thanks, Michelle, and hello, everyone. I have been a member of the Hidden Disability community since 2005 when I was in a car accident, and it left me with a traumatic brain injury and a lot of soft tissue damage. So although I can walk, talk, see, and hear, I have multiple disabilities that are invisible and silent, and that is what I consider to be hidden disabilities. The most challenging limitations I face are the ones that are cognitive. I have memory issues, I have brain fog and cognitive fatigue, a lot of other issues, and because of this, I cannot work. It has affected my sensory processing, so I don't always understand what I see and what I hear. Because of that, I don't drive, and reading often is difficult for me. And ironically, the web accessibility standards do not meet my needs. They actually work against my needs for reading. My sleep is a mess. My sense of time is distorted. I have a really weird appetite. The impact from the brain injury also caused chemical changes in my brain. So I developed major depression, which is a mental illness. And again, because of the soft tissue damage, I live in chronic pain. So I'm happy, don't worry, but life is small, it's unpredictable, and it's quite messy. And because I get very easily overwhelmed by the world, I need something that will speak for me when I am least able to speak for myself. So in 2009, I developed my own hidden disability symbol, and it's available as a free downloadable digital file. It's on my hidden disability page on Facebook, and I have over 7,000 followers on that page. And over the years, their feedback has taught me that I am not alone. The vast majority avoid places, events, and situations regularly. And to me, this is not acceptable, and it is a far cry from the Accessible Canada Act that promises barrier-free living by 2040. Of those that are using my symbol, most have told me that they feel that they're understood better, that they're treated better, and that they're more confident when they are out in the world asking for assistance. There are a lot of other symbols out there, And this just proves again to me that we have a need for a one recognizable symbol to avoid confusion between all these symbols. And what this single symbol would do would act as a self-advocacy tool for individual members of the hidden disability community, but it would also build awareness of the common needs and shared experiences of the members of the hidden disability community, and break down systemic barriers that we face every day. So that's why I and Brain Injury Society of Toronto and Brain Injury Canada have created an e-petition. And we are asking the Government of Canada to adopt and promote a national hidden disability symbol. It closes for signatures on February 5th. So if you have not already signed it, please sign it before February 5th. But we can't stop with a petition. We need associations like those who have come to this webinar today. Thank you, everyone. We need organizations, we need individuals to join this movement. We need to create a strong voice and a highly visible presence so that we can educate and influence our federal members of parliament, so that we can do the same with our national disability leaders and with our disability decision makers at the national level. And I can't tell you how important, at least to me, today is in achieving this. And I'm very, very touched by this event. It is a diverse representation of and for the hidden disability community in a very public way. I believe we're making disability history today. So if you can join our movement, please do so. It is time. It is definitely right, and it is most needed. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much, Laura. I mean, you've done so much this. You're the reason we're all here. So I have a presentation, and of course, this would be the time where I can't find it in my files. Sorry about that, people, just patience. Okay, so there it is. Okay. So I hope everyone can see my screen. So I'm here to talk on behalf of the brain injury community. So believing is seen, the invisible nature of brain injury. So an acquired brain injury is any injury to the brain that occurs after birth and is not related to a congenital or degenerative disease. So there are two types of brain injury: non-traumatic, such as brain tumors and stroke, and traumatic, such as concussion, assaults, intimate partner violence, and car accidents. So the numbers are pretty staggering. There's 165,000 TBIs every year in Canada. That's 456 people a day, and one person injured every 3 minutes. When you include the non-traumatic causes, that's 4% of the population, and that's 1.5 million Canadians living with acquired brain injury. And then if you include family, approximately 14% of the Canadian population is affected by acquired brain injury. So the hidden impacts, there's cognitive, Laura touched on some of these: more time needed to process information, communications with communicating challenges, some of the physical headaches, visual impairment, light and sound sensitivity, fatigue, and then the emotional changes in personality, irritability, mood swings, depression, anger, and then behavioral impulsiveness, risky behavior. And so this is a great representation of what we can see versus what we can't see. And brain injury does not exist in its own bubble. It is intersectional, meaning it contributes to and is affected by personal circumstances and systemic barriers. So the invisible nature of brain injury and the lack of appropriate services and support and the lack of awareness creates even more barriers. So mental health, people with brain injury have a significantly greater chance of developing mental health issues. 50% of people with TBI are affected by depression. And a study found that adults with concussion committed suicide 3 times the population norm. Employment is a challenge no matter the severity of injury. So a study found that only approximately 40% of people with brain injury return to work after 1 or 2 years, and underemployment and unemployment lead to poorer outcomes, psychosocial issues, and decreased community integration. Housing, the wait time for brain injury specific housing is 10 to 20 years, depending on where you live. People are living away from their communities and their family, and long-term care becomes the default housing no matter what age a person is. And homelessness can be bi-directional. Brain injury can lead to homelessness, and homelessness can increase the chance of acquiring a brain injury. And approximately 50% of people experiencing homelessness have a brain injury. And then incarceration, men and women who have had a traumatic brain injury were about 2.5 times more likely to be incarcerated. And 55% of women in the study reported a TBI prior to first crime, and 1% of men. So how can a hidden disability symbol help the brain injury community? It will be more representative, inclusive. It will foster opportunities for education about hidden disabilities, reducing assumptions and stigma, and promoting understanding. Visibility and representation will lead to more fair and equitable supports and treatments across the lifespan, no matter where a person lives. It will help identify intersecting challenges in brain injury and lead to more development of strategies and solutions, and it will empower individuals and families to advocate for their health. So to echo Laura, it is time, it is right, and it is needed. Okay, so I am thrilled to introduce our next speakers, moving this right along. Maria Hudspith, the Executive Director of Pain BC, and Linda Wilhelm, President of the Canadian Arthritis Patients Alliance. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Michelle. Great to be here. So I'm coming to you from North Vancouver, from the unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh First Nations. And I'm really excited to be here. Often the disabilities movement has been so far out in front, and the voices of people who live with chronic pain for so long have been invalidated. People have been stigmatized, certainly in the last number of years with the pendulum swing around opioids and opioid prescribing. We are certainly seeing people who live with pain even being criminalized. So this is a wonderful opportunity to talk about pain and pain-related disability and how a hidden disability symbol could benefit the 1 in 5 Canadians who live with chronic pain. So we know that chronic pain is incredibly prevalent, so 1 in 5 in the population, but if we're talking about people over the age of 65, there's actually 1 in 3 Canadians who live with chronic pain. We often think of chronic pain as something that is a symptom of something else. But what we now know is that chronic pain can be a chronic disease in its own right. And gratefully, the World Health Organization has just recognized that with the new International Classification of Diseases, the 11th version of that, which comes into effect this year. And for the first time recognizes that chronic pain, it can arise from another chronic disease, from injury, from surgery, but for many people, chronic pain can become a disease in its own right, and it needs to be recognized as such. So we are seeing growing recognition of pain, and also recognizing that for many people, disability is not something that you are or you're not, or you live with or you don't. For many people, the experience of intermittent changes in function. So for many people who live with chronic pain, they are going to have periods where they can do certain things, and the next day they may not be able to do those. And so the value of a hidden disability symbol, where we can recognize that there are many people living in our country grappling with conditions where their abilities may change, but they need the recognition, they need validation, and need to be believed. So I'm really happy to see that certainly on the pain front, the last few years we've had the work of the Canadian Pain Task Force. This is a work that was tasked by the federal government to address pain prevention, care, education, and research in Canada. And we did complete a national action plan for pain, which was endorsed by the government this last spring. So I'm going to turn it over to Linda Wilhelm, a beloved colleague and friend of mine, to talk about her lived experience with pain and the impact of a hidden disability symbol. Thanks, Linda.
Thank you, Maria. I was diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis when I was 23 in 1983, so I have lived with it for a long time. I have now visible disabilities, but when my disease was probably at its very worst, and I struggled the most, I didn't have visible disabilities. And I remember parking and disabled parking and people coming out and looking at this 24, 25-year-old woman thinking, why is she parking in this spot, and giving me dirty looks and making all kinds of assumptions. And it was uncomfortable. It was almost like once I started getting the joint deformities and the disabilities that were visible, it was almost like a relief, which it shouldn't have to be, but that's what it felt like, because then at least now I had something where they could see that I was struggling. Many people in our community now, and our treatments have changed dramatically over the last 20 years when we got access to biologics. So as Maria said, a lot of the diseases around pain and inflammatory arthritis are episodic. One day you wake up and you feel fine and you can park at the far end of the parking lot and get some extra exercise, but the next day you wake up and you can't hardly move, and yet you still try to struggle to do the things you need to do. And that's happening more and more now with biologics, because these drugs take some time to work. So people are often in those first 6 months dealing with excruciating pain and limitations in their daily life, but they look absolutely fine. And people don't understand, and they don't understand when it's younger people that are struggling. We have children that live with juvenile idiopathic arthritis that struggle every day. It is beyond time that we acknowledge that there are hidden disabilities to try to make life accessible for all Canadians, and to help them live the best life that they can possibly live, and be able to access and do the things they need to do every day. I think that and with CAPA, Canadian Arthritis Patient Alliance, we've done a lot of work over the years with episodic disabilities and trying to raise awareness of these conditions and what people are living with every day. So I think that, as others have said, the time is now for this. It's past time, and we need to make sure that government acts to make everybody's lives important and accessible. And I'll leave it there and turn it over to the next person.
Thank you so much, Linda and Maria. So next up is Dr. Mahadeo Sukhai. He's Director of Research and Chief Inclusion and Accessibility Officer at the Canadian National Institute for the Blind. Welcome, Mahadeo.
Thank you very much, Michelle. And good afternoon, everybody. Good morning, depending on which time zone you're in. It's a pleasure to spend some time with you today and have a bit of a conversation. I'm not going to share slides with you. I do want to have a chat, and I want to talk about invisible disabilities or hidden disabilities in a bit of a different context. When we have this conversation, we talk a lot about brain injury. We talk a lot about chronic pain. We talk a lot about other chronic illnesses and chronic medical conditions. We talk a lot about tumor survivorship, and we talk a lot about sort of the after effects of treatment and disabling as those after effects can be. What we don't often recognize, though, is that it's not necessarily a cut and dried kind of conversation. A lot of conversations in the space around hidden or invisible disabilities sort of force an artificial divide between visible disabilities, so physical disabilities and sensory disabilities as examples, and invisible or hidden disabilities, which would include everything I just mentioned, as well as mental health and learning disabilities and neurodiversity and other disabilities which are, quote unquote, not obvious. But I think it's actually really important to actually talk through what does not obvious actually mean. And so I'm going to throw some numbers at you for a little bit that are specific to the blindness community and people with print disabilities. And I want us to just think about what all of this is actually saying. So there are 1.5 million Canadians over the age of 15 who are blind or partially sighted. 85% of those live with multiple disabilities. And they may live with pain-related disabilities, flexibility-related disabilities, dexterity-related disabilities, hearing loss, mental health issues, and so on. And so 85% of 1.5 million is a lot of people. It's like almost 1.3 million individuals who live with multiple disabilities, including sight loss. But here's the funny thing: only about 0.01% of that 1.5 million use a guide dog. And only about 11% of that 1.5 million use a white cane. And so what that means is there's 1,350,000 people in this country who are blind or partially sighted who use neither cane nor dog. And then if they're not using a cane or a dog, and by the way, I'm one of that number of 1.35 million who don't use a cane or who don't use a dog, but who does have a seeing disability. And so if you met me in pre-pandemic times walking down a street in Kingston, Ontario, where I live in the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe and the Haudenosaunee people, then you would not know, because I'm not using a cane or a dog, you would not know that I actually had a lived experience with a disability. And so what that means then is even for people who have what are called visible disabilities, I think it's worth it acknowledging that a large contingent of that population also lives in the hidden disability realm. And I think I'm just going to highlight that and also highlight something else about print disability. So a print disability is a disability where one's lived experience is such that one doesn't interact with text, doesn't interact with print materials like a book or a newspaper or a flyer, doesn't interact with information on the web in text form in the way that that a lot of human beings are accustomed to interacting with that information, which is by reading it with our eyes, right? And as you've heard from a couple of the other speakers, that doesn't just come from somebody having a visual impairment. That could also come from changes in our brains. It could come from brain injury. It could come from all sorts of different forms of lived experience. And not all of those lived experiences harmonize with one another. I think it's a really good point that the World Wide Web accessibility guidelines, the WCAG guidelines, are friendly to one type of print disability without necessarily being friendly to other types of print disabilities, which is a legitimate problem. And so when we think about print disabilities, there's 3.4 million Canadians with print disabilities, and most of those Canadians with print disabilities, if you were to catch them on a street corner again pre-COVID, you wouldn't know, right? And so when we talk hidden disability, I think it's worth it to open up the conversation, because what makes the disability obvious isn't that we have it, it's how we navigate the world in the context of that lived experience. Is it that I'm using a walker or a cane or a sign language interpreter or a guide dog or some piece of technology or assistance from a human that means that my ability to interact with the world and my need to interact with the world using some form of aid actually has suddenly become evident to everybody else. And so disabilities can be hidden in many ways, and it can also be situational in many ways. I will use a cane in an airport or a train station to get around. I won't use a cane going to the grocery store or in a neighborhood that I know. I use a cane at night. I don't use a cane during the day. And so in some cases, my disability is obvious. In some cases, my disability is not. And I think it's important for us to, as we have this conversation, sort of recognize some of the larger contexts, and also recognize, this is the last thing I would say before passing it on to the next speaker, and also recognize that a symbol is a very interesting thing. And I will share with you sort of the experience of people who are blind or partially sighted around the symbology of the cane, because there's a movement within the sight loss community that says that everybody should use a cane, because that way the world knows that you have a sight loss. And then there's a counter movement that says that not everybody needs to or wants to use a cane, and that's a personal choice, and it's not something that ought to be necessarily mandated. And I think there's a bit of a story in there that is worth acknowledging and considering as well. And that is that having an international symbol or a national symbol for hidden and invisible disabilities, I think needs to take into account all forms of hidden and invisible disabilities, and also needs to take into account that some people are okay with actually not using the symbol. And at the end of the day, it does become it becomes an individual's choice. Having the symbol is a good thing. Mandating the symbol is a tricky thing. And so I'm going to stop there, having dropped my inflammatory bombshell into the conversation, and pass it on to the next speaker.
Thank you so much, Mahadeo. It's those kind of comments that get the discussion going. So I'm happy to introduce our next speakers. We've got Shauna Beaudoin, who is the Director of Programs and Information at Hydrocephalus Canada, and Laura Gatensby, a board member at Hydrocephalus Canada. So if you can both unmute and turn on your cameras.
Thank you, Michelle, for the kind introduction and for inviting Hydrocephalus Canada to be part of the discussion on why Canada needs a national hidden disability symbol today. Hydrocephalus Canada recently joined the hidden disability movement. So to start, I'd like to talk a bit about the organization and the hidden condition we represent. Hydrocephalus Canada is a national organization that bridges research awareness and innovation with advocacy, education, and support to empower those impacted by hydrocephalus, as well as spina bifida, to experience their best life. We were formed in 1973 by a group of parents looking for information and connection with other parents raising a child with these conditions. It is estimated that 120,000 Canadians are living with hydrocephalus, from children to seniors. Hydrocephalus occurs when there is a blockage in the brain that causes the cerebrospinal fluid that cushions the brain and spinal column to become blocked. To manage hydrocephalus, the most common treatment is to have brain surgery to insert a mechanical device called a shunt. The shunt regulates the excess cerebrospinal fluid away from the brain cavities through a valve and tubing to drain and be reabsorbed into another part of the body. There is no cure for hydrocephalus. It is a neurological condition that can develop at any time throughout the lifespan. It is often a secondary condition that develops due to a brain tumor, brain injury, or associated birth condition, such as spina bifida, but it can also develop during pregnancy or later in life with no known cause. Hydrocephalus is the most common reason for brain surgery in children. As many as 30,000 Canadians may be living with one form called idiopathic normal pressure hydrocephalus. It affects people over the age of 65 and is often misdiagnosed as onset dementia, Alzheimer's, or Parkinson's. Unlike these conditions, it can be treated and some or all of the symptoms can improve. For many living with hydrocephalus, there are no outward or physical differences. However, they deal on a daily basis wondering if their shunt is going to fail. And it's a fairly high percentage, 40% of shunts placed within the first 2 years, leading to numerous revisions and possible further injury to the brain. 35% of people with hydrocephalus will develop seizure disorders. Many experience painful headaches, vision, and hearing impairments. Secondary developmental disabilities can also occur, resulting in cognitive, behavioral, and nonverbal learning issues. A person with hydrocephalus may find it difficult to express their feelings or understand social cues, leading to lifelong challenges in building friendships and interacting in social situations. They often feel isolated. People with a hidden disability like hydrocephalus often face stigma by peers because they can't see the impairment, which can make it difficult for family, friends, and coworkers to comprehend or believe there is a genuine disability. Fear of disclosing hydrocephalus may exclude capable individuals from finding meaningful employment. And we feel a nationally adopted symbol for those that live with hidden conditions like hydrocephalus will increase awareness of the challenges adults and children with these conditions face on a daily basis. One priority we see for the future of a hidden disability symbol in Canada is to engage the various communities like we're doing today to advocate for a nationally recognized symbol within all levels of government. I am also a person born with spina bifida. It's not necessarily a hidden disability, but what I live with day to day is hidden. I live with chronic pain and fatigue on a daily basis. And now I'm going to pass it over to my colleague, Laura Gatensby, to speak about her lived experience with hydrocephalus.
Oh. You're good to go. We can hear
Hi,
you.
thank you. Can you see me?
Yep, we can see you and hear you.
Oh, okay, super. Hi, my name is Laura Gatensby. I'm very happy to be here today. Until about 5 years ago, I had never really even thought about disabilities, hidden or otherwise. In 2016, after having just opened a new business, I picked up what I thought was a cold. And when it didn't go away, I figured it was the flu. It got worse. So eventually I did see the doctor. And after various tests, 17 days after opening my brand new business, I was diagnosed with a large and aggressive acoustic neuroma, which was a thankfully benign brain tumor, a ping pong ball. I went from unpleasantly well to barely able to move over the next few weeks. I was vomiting regularly and was woozy all the time. And most alarmingly, it appeared that my vision was getting worse. So in early January, I was admitted to the ICU at Toronto Western, and it turned out that in addition to the brain tumor, I had won the lottery of rare complications. I was diagnosed with idiopathic intracranial hypertension, as well as hydrocephalus, and told that it was cerebrospinal fluid that was building up in my eye sockets and causing the vision problems, and that I needed immediate surgery to relieve it or risk permanent blindness. So this led to a number of surgeries, including one to insert a shunt running from the brain to the abdomen, as Shauna mentioned, to drain the fluid. I did go blind for several days, which was terrifying, but thankfully the shunt worked and the CSF drained, and I got back most of my sight. I lost peripheral vision, which seemed like a small price to pay. I was still extremely ill, but at least I could see. I ended up staying at Western, mainly in the ICU, for 79 days, and then spent another 6 weeks at a rehab hospital, then back to Western for the craniotomy and more rehab. So 2017, as you might imagine, was a bit of a blur. In addition to the trauma of the various surgeries, I found myself dealing with several unwelcome outcomes. The most challenging issue was balance. The standard for tumor removal is to go in through the ear canal, which in addition to eliminating hearing in that ear, impacts balance and equilibrium tremendously. So I was on a walker for a year, and I still have to use a cane for balance today. The hearing was a challenge unto itself, of course. Not only was I now completely deaf on the left side, but while I was at Western, I'd picked up an infection of the right eardrum that took about 70% of that hearing as well. The damage to my eyes was worse than I had initially understood. In addition to issues with both nearsightedness and farsightedness, the peripheral blindness turned out to be a bigger problem. According to the Ministry of Transportation, this makes me legally blind, so I've lost my driver's license as well. Another unwelcome effect of the balance and equilibrium issues has been chronic nausea. And after all of this trauma and trying to acclimate to my new reality, I also dealt with severe depression for a number of years. So amazingly, it's now 5 years later, and I am very grateful to be alive. I did have one more brain surgery in 2019 when my shunt malfunctioned, which is something that can happen quite frequently. So I'm also very grateful that it's only happened once. I still deal with significant balance issues, so I'm not sure that my cane is ever going to stop being a necessity. And the nausea has continued, so I'm working with a GI specialist to explore that. But in many ways, the cane has been a blessing because it tends to ensure that people don't think that I'm drunk or otherwise inebriated when I'm wobbly. The hearing is never coming back, and I've learned to manage pretty well with my hearing aid in my one ear that still works. And the technology that's available today makes a huge difference. Being able to link my phone and my hearing aid has just been transformational, but I still, and likely always will, have to self-identify as hearing impaired and make sure that people are speaking up or know that I'm likely going to have to ask them to repeat. Vision-wise, I'm useless without my very strong glasses for distance and reading, but of course that's manageable, and the peripheral blindness continues to be an issue, and I still can't drive. I've also had to acknowledge that I've had significant challenges with memory loss, and that there have been impacts to cognitive ability as well. Most recently, I was diagnosed with epilepsy as a result of either the brain tumor or the hydrocephalus, as it is a common outcome with both. So in many ways, the ways that our world has changed over the last few years since COVID has actually made it a little bit easier for me. Working from home means that I generally don't have to worry about not driving. And the fact that remote work has become a way of life means that it hasn't had to be about my disabilities. Both the hearing and the vision issues aren't immediately noticeable, and especially with the hearing, it continually amazes me that I meet with so much frustration so frequently from people when I ask them to repeat, or that the assumption is that I'm just not paying attention if I have a memory issue. I love the concept of a hidden disability symbol that would help to lend credence and a level of gravitas, if you will, to the hidden issues that people are facing. And I hope that it would also help to drive a change in the public consciousness about how people respond to hidden disabilities. I know from my work with Hydrocephalus Canada and my participation in online communities that I have a lot to be grateful for. And I can attest from my experience that a hidden disability symbol is both necessary and crucial to improving the future for so many. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Laura and Shauna. Okay, so I want to make sure we have enough time for discussion, but so I've got our last speaker, Rafi Sayed. He's the Secretary and Head of Marketing Committee and the Board of Directors at Mind Ally. Welcome, Rafi.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. I'm here to talk about my experience as someone living with a hidden disability. I work as a marketing and public relations professional, but I also live with dissociative identity disorder. Full disclosure, my name is Zalasar. I am one of the co-hosts of the system, as in the group of identities that live and share this body. It is a trauma-based disorder, and I've been living with DID for several years without having any sense of assistance, which is what has driven me to advocate for better visibility of my disorder, and at the same time destigmatize it. Part of this journey was to join a peer support mental health nonprofit called Mind Ally Canada, where I work as a secretary and a marketing head. And Mind Ally Canada advocates for destigmatizing mental illnesses to create more awareness and peer support in workplaces, in schools, and in interpersonal groups. So as someone with DID, which used to be known as multiple personality disorder, I faced a lot of problems over the past few years, fully functioning in workplaces, in schools, due to a lot of the challenges that come with my disorder. I have a lot of I have a lot of mental illnesses in my family. That some of them are hereditary, some of them are acquired, which has only impacted my ability to live with this disorder. So sorry about that. This is the first time that me as a system have been talking about ourselves in a public space. And this is quite a big challenge for us to be facing an audience and speaking about it in a public environment. But I'm really thankful to be here. So a lot of struggles that we face with this disorder are invisible, in the sense that we have a lot of amnesia, a lot of dissociation. There are trauma recollections and triggers that we experience on a day-to-day basis that can happen anywhere in like public spaces, at work, and along with it comes a lot of emotional and mental disruption. And with it also a lot of exhaustion and fatigue, which is physical. We regularly experience panic attacks, mild seizures, lots of time skips, chronic anxiety, chronic depression, a whole lot of suicidal ideation. But on the outside, because we've been so used to masking this, it can completely go unnoticed. But there are a lot of common barriers that we face in our day-to-day life, which can cause significant distress in our interpersonal relationships and barriers in our workplaces. There's a lot of hesitation around disclosing the specifics of this disorder due to the extreme stigmatization of the disorder in the general public, and especially in media. And as a media professional, I've faced this challenge of representing myself in the media accurately. Sorry about that. So a nationally adopted symbol can be really helpful for someone with my disorder, because it allows me to communicate about my hidden disability without disclosing what it is. I can upload a symbol in a virtual space, or carry a tag with myself. So if I'm dissociating or if I'm switching from alter to alter, I can, and if an episode occurs, and if I'm having a seizure, someone would not mistake me for having something else. There's a lot of instances around law enforcement getting involved with people with disorder, like hidden disabilities and disorders, including schizophrenia, where the outcome has been fatal. And I believe that the nonverbal communication that comes with displaying a symbol can provide extra protection in the case of incontinence. The hidden disability symbol being nationally adopted will also create awareness of various disabilities and will push people to want to learn more about the symptoms and how to handle people with hidden disabilities. It might also push for reforms in diagnostic practices. And the hidden disability symbol can help in improving accessibility and caregiving within the system. Currently, I have been working from home with a flexible schedule in a company that has fully embraced my hidden disability, where I have disclosed my hidden disability, and a wonderful team works with me and my cerebral alters as ourselves by our names. And this is a rare occurrence. I have lost a lot of jobs in the past because I couldn't disclose my hidden disability, and the cumulative stress of masking in public spaces as a marketing professional who needs to speak in public, who needs to be active, has caused significant distress and has impacted my ability to have a living, have a comfortable living. So I believe that a nationally adopted hidden disability symbol can help people like me so that everyone else with a dissociative identity disorder, which is 1 to 2% of the population, can still function in public spaces without having to disclose our disorders, which has a lot of emotional toll. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Rafi. That was your honesty in sharing your story, and the voices of those with lived experience need to power this movement. They need to be the fuel that gets the government listening. So I'm going to invite the panelists to turn their cameras on. Everyone's lovely faces up on the screen. Okay, it was a really interesting chat to, wanted to follow the speakers, but then also follow the chat. So there's obviously lots of passion within and agreement within the chat for a symbol. So we do have a few questions. So maybe I'll read them out, and I think the first one is going to go to Laura. Would it not be better to stick with the current internationally known hidden disability symbol? Having one for Canada, different from many others, may not be beneficial.
Okay, well, you've asked a very good question. The issue is that the wheelchair symbol was developed as an accessibility symbol, and specifically for physical accessibility. So it's related to mobility. Initially in the 60s, it was related to mobility disabilities, but it wasn't about disability, it was about accessibility. So, and what I'm seeing now is a lot of memes and other symbols coming up, and they're referencing hidden disabilities within the context of the wheelchair symbol. And personally, I think that's a huge mistake. I think it's very short-sighted. And it's based on a false assumption that this symbol is about disability. I think society has come to the easy assumption that it's a disability symbol, but it's not. And I think we need to go way beyond that. Mahadeo, sorry, I said your name wrong, talked about a false divide. And I agree. Ultimately, possibly not within my lifetime, but I think we should have one disability symbol. But I think between now and then, we need a hidden disability symbol, because I believe that there's a false priority. There's a perception that communication and mobility related disabilities are the priorities. And when you look at legislation, when you look at policies that employers have implemented, when you look at any policies on the web of regional, like city, regional, provincial, national, they tend to focus on communication and mobility disabilities. So that's my answer. It's a long answer, but yeah, I think associating with the wheelchair symbol is a big mistake.
And sorry, Laura, can you,
Michelle,
oh, sorry, go ahead, Linda.
Yeah, I just had one comment to add to that. Also, I mean, for me, there's times that my mobility is not my issue. I have a lot of difficulties with my hands. And with Canada Post, I tried to get a community mailbox. Everybody else wanted their mail delivered to their door in a mailbox. For me, that was a difficult thing to do for a number of reasons. So I wanted a community mailbox that I could maybe go for a walk some days to go get. But my issues were opening the door of the thing. And do you think I could get it through anybody at Canada Post that my issue wasn't mobility, that my issue was upper body, and they couldn't comprehend it? So we can't just put everybody in one box. I think, you know, nobody knows what issues you have and what difficulties you have unless they're you. And there shouldn't be an openness to accept everybody for whatever limitations they have.
Yeah, I agree. I think eventually, when all disabilities people are aware of all disabilities and all limitations, which is what we're working towards, maybe we can. But right now, there's no way we can effectively put everybody in one box. There's just no way. There's not enough awareness out there.
Michelle, it's
Oh, yes,
Mahadeo.
go ahead.
Sorry, I would actually add to what both Laura and my colleague on the panel have said, and say this: humans suck at counting. Really suck at counting. Everything has to be categorized into one bin or another bin, and the notion of somebody living with multiple experiences. So I have a visual impairment, but I also identify as neurodiverse. And as I said, 85% of people who are blind or partially sighted identify with multiple lived experiences. In the overall Canadian disability population, I think the number is somewhere around 60 or 70%. And so a lot of people with lived experiences of disability, whether you've identified on the Canadian Survey on Disability or not, you know, a lot of people with lived experiences identify with multiple disabilities. And I mean, I actually think the CSD is undercounting the number of people with disabilities in Canada, because CSD gave us a number of 22.3%. And then if we think about chronic medical conditions and other hidden disabilities, the number is 1 in 5 Canadians, and those two numbers don't sit very well together, because what that ends up meaning is you've got at most 43% of Canadians who identify with some form of lived experience, but probably some number in between, probably closer to 30 or 35, because there's double counting, and humans hate double counting. And I absolutely also agree. I think, Laura, your point around what legislation does is astonishingly accurate, and it's not only astonishingly accurate, but disgustingly accurate, because there is sort of this call out of particularly mobility disability and some forms of communication disability, where if that's not the thought process and rubric that you consider yourself a part of, then how does the legislation actually work in that space or not? And in the research that I do at CNIB, I don't just make it about blind or partially sighted. And Michelle knows this because we've collaborated on a few projects. I make it rather more about sort of sensory and perceptual disabilities. And even so, I recognize that's a particular grouping that not a whole lot of people get a lot of traction with. But we did it to start to make a point, and it's the same point that you've been driving at, Laura, which is that the bias around the conversation around disability has a lot to do with what people quote unquote see, which in and of itself is weirdly offensive.
Yeah, so I'm just going to reiterate, because I'm monitoring the chat. There's a lot of questions about the sunflower. So that is a for-profit, and Laura addressed that in Canada we deserve something that's free. We don't. The sunflower it's a business, and then the international. Laura, can you speak to the eye symbol?
The eye symbol, if I have it right, is the symbol of the Invisible Disabilities Association. They do have outreach, like multinational sites, I think, but I think they are generally US based. I've been doing this a long time, and I will warn people, I am very strong-minded about this, but I'm not closed-minded, I hope. I've put a lot of thought into this. Hidden is not the best word, but it's the best word I could find, because I believe that invisible, is too long for people with, say, English isn't their second language or lower reading levels. And I also believe that with the I symbol, the word invisible is an English bias. If we want this to be something people can use, you can't put something that's based on an English word for invisible in a symbol. The word hidden can be translated, but the I for invisible cannot. So I'm trying to be as inclusive as possible. And the reason I don't go with invisible is because so many disabilities are also silent or inaudible. And I don't want ultimately for the audible and inaudible disability communities to feel excluded.
Well, and to clarify, because there seems to be a lot of chat about what this symbol is, what we're asking the Canadian government is to investigate what works with Canada, for Canada. So, and the symbol that Laura has developed is not, the symbol will have to be tested. It will have to, go out to all these disability organizations. We're asking the government of Canada to start the processing of how do we recognize hidden disabilities in Canada appropriately. And that process will be, looking at what other symbols are there. So that's we're just trying to get the government mobilized. And so I recognize that we have 1 minute. Does anyone, I'm so appreciative of everyone being here and sharing your time and your experience. And, it's a really interesting chat. There's lots of strong sentiments and lots of strong feelings, but this is what will get this moving. And so we appreciate the comments, and have everyone sign the petition, write to their MPs. Laura has developed a toolkit on the Hidden Disabilities site, and we'll be sending links after the webinar with the webinar recording. But we need to mobilize. We need to use this passion and this energy to get the government to stand up and listen. And so I thank you all so much for being here today. It's so appreciated. It's so important. And we'll keep this conversation going. Thank you all.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's a pleasure being part.